We are really excited to begin with the presentation, Advancing Oyster-Based Coastal Resilience in Biscayne Bay, Genomic Connectivity and Environmental Drivers of Resilience in Florida's Eastern Oyster. And our first presenter is Miya Khoo.
Oh, thank you. So kind. Thank you all for your attendance. My name is Miya Khoo. I am a graduate research student at the University of Miami under the lab advisement of Dr. John Stieglitz, my advisor, and Dr. Marjorie Alexiak. And we are excited to be sharing with you the research project we are currently working on, which is the Genomic Connectivity and Environmental Drivers of Resilience in Florida's Eastern Oyster, or Crassostrea virginica. So without further ado, before I get into the nitty-gritty details of our experiment, I want to open with some background and context for the project. So, as we all know, oysters are a very important keystone estuarine species. Once upon a time, back in the early 1900s, they were incredibly abundant here in the state of Florida, but have since been largely lost on both the Gulf and Atlantic coasts. But this is a tragedy because these species serve many ecosystem services, including water filtration and nutrient removal, such as phosphates, which can be very detrimental in high quantities, especially here in Biscayne Bay, which is a much more closed system. And they also provide shoreline stabilization and marine habitats to many marine organisms that they share this space with. Additionally, they support high levels of biodiversity, and they serve to filter out things like chlorophyll A, as they are filter feeders. And so reinstating oysters or restoring oyster habitats in the state work well for everybody because we decrease things like turbidity, runoff, or pollutants in the water. So we will talk more about our plan for the oysters as we go forth. Beyond them being an incredibly ecologically relevant species, they're incredibly economically relevant species for Florida. Historically, they used to be one of Florida's greatest fisheries. It's providing over 90% of the state's overall harvest, and I believe it was somewhere around 10% of the nationwide harvest. Unfortunately, today these fisheries have all but collapsed. These mainly came from the Big Bend region, including Apalachicola Bay, the Tampa area, and also the Cedar Key region. In 2013, NOAA declared a state of federal disaster for the C. virginica oyster reefs, and in 2020 there was an oyster moratorium, closing all oystering down entirely. In other news, better news, this year, January 2026, there has been openings back to oystermen, but with very high limitations and regulations. Many people are on the case, including us. There has been great research in this field as to what are the primary drivers of oyster decline and how are they surviving, why are they not surviving. So one key factor, of course, is rising salinity. Here in Miami-Dade especially, we are no strangers to this with urban dredging and urban canals, which result in reduced freshwater inflow. Again, these are an estuarine species. They do not do well on either extreme of the spectrum, whether that be incredibly fresh or incredibly saline conditions. In addition, we have experienced high eutrophication, hypoxia, turbidity, and contaminant exposure, which is reducing oyster density and survivability. And additionally, we are experiencing habitat modification and shoreline hardening with urbanization. So in our lab, we are not only thinking about the adult mortalities that these oysters are experiencing, but we are also concerned with the larval aspect of these oyster survival. So of course, without interbreeding and with our larval survivability, we cannot hope that these populations will recover. So in our lab, we are investigating larval connectivity and dispersal between the remaining and surviving oyster populations. But unfortunately, loss of settlement, substrate in Miami and Biscayne Bay has seen a large loss of larval survival and reduced fertilization, and moreover reduced dispersal, which means these populations are not able to successfully connect and interbreed with one another, which means this is increased vulnerability for these populations and oftentimes leads to the local collapse of entire groups of these species. You have a lovely picture of an oyster villager there. So, oh my goodness, I'm killing it. So that brings me to our specific project aims and approaches. Again, the primary overarching goal of this project is to assess how these populations are connected and how and potentially why they are surviving in these conditions. Our primary aim is to thus assess genetic relatedness and connectivity of these populations across both the Atlantic and Gulf coasts of Florida. So I've been doing a lot of driving, a lot. Secondarily, we aim to assess how environmental parameters such as salinity, temperature, DO, nutrients, and pH, which I know many people here specialize in, may correlate with these genetic connectivity signals and larval dispersal, potentially revealing signals of locally adapted populations to these variable environmental conditions. And third, why we're probably all here, all of us Biscayne Bay lovers, we are specifically determining the extent of genetic connectivity in C. virginica populations here in the Biscayne Bay region. This will help us to select for ideal broodstock at our facility at the University of Miami Experimental Hatchery, where we hope to breed ideal lines of oysters and for the eventual outplanting of these oysters into Biscayne Bay. So for this project, we predict first that there will be moderate to high connectivity at the statewide level, with some genetic discontinuities around geographic barriers such as Cape Canaveral as well as down south in the Everglades region. Secondarily, we expect that environmentally extreme or variable habitats such as urbanized zones as here in Miami-Dade, very dredged areas, will show reduced connectivity represented in our genomic analyses as allele shifts, representing locally adapted populations. And then here in Biscayne Bay, we expect that among all these groups that are being tested, it will be extremely discontinuous due to the hydrodynamic compartmentalization, as a result of these canals and high levels of runoff, etc. So this is a very professional map that I made for you all in PowerPoint. Of all the places that I collected these samples from, we have 8 outside of Biscayne Bay across both coasts, and then we have Biscayne Bay with 9 sites of its own. Here's a more zoomed in map of the Biscayne Bay sampling sites for you. At every site we are collecting, so at all sites, regardless Biscayne Bay or not, there are 30 oysters collected per site. We have 550-ish samples in total, with one outgroup from the Cape Cod region of Massachusetts. In terms of selecting which sampling sites we wanted to pull from, we tried to do a diverse range of urban and less urban zones, with Miami, Jacksonville, and Tampa being urban, less urban being, say, Everglades and the Cape Coral regions, which have less pollution and better water quality than we do here. We also pulled from those historical fishery zones Apalachicola and Cedar Key in the Big Bend area. So like I said, a big focus of this is Biscayne Bay health. We have 9 sites going up and down the coast of Biscayne Bay, but I would like to note none of these sites were pulled from national park regions. We love our national parks. So in terms of methodology, for anyone who's a genetics person as we are using a genomic analysis protocol, genotyping by sequencing, developed by the Elsher et al. Group in 2011 at Cornell University. It is a reduced representation approach. It basically uses selected size fragments to call SNP data, and we will essentially use this as a mechanism to assess how populations are connected or disconnected based on these SNP shifts. We will then eventually plan to integrate environmental data into this analysis. As I mentioned before, here we are pulling it from public water quality data. If anybody wants to give me their water quality data, I would love that. But we will then do a correlation analysis with our genetic sequencing results and see how it goes from there, and see if we can discover some of the drivers of this resilience, hence the name of my project. So in sum, project impacts, our primary concern here is to restore and conserve the health of marine habitats within Biscayne Bay. Again, some of these drivers of oyster decline we feel are at the larval level. Oysters are broadcast spawners, so like many marine organisms, they require, proximity to fellow spawners in order to survive. We believe that the surviving populations in Biscayne Bay, even though they could be locally adapted to these changing conditions, could simply be a proximity issue in terms of having close distance to available larvae or spawning adults, resulting in reduced fertilization success, which represents a recruitment bottleneck here in the bay. Our solution that we propose is a restorative aquaculture approach at the University of Miami Experimental Hatchery, where we have begun conditioning oyster broodstock, and to use the results of this genetic approach to have an ideal genetic line for the eventual outplanting of these oysters into the Biscayne Bay region. We feel in the long term this will be very beneficial because oysters serve, as I said, many vital ecosystem services. Many marine organisms benefit from their presence in the bay, and they also, again, will improve the local water quality and provide habitats to marine organisms that currently are going without their natural habitat. So, thank you so much.